don't have to think about it.
Yeah.
It'll just pick
And
it up.
there was some comment that mic, any mic, didn't get to anybody behind. It was working well for the TV, but for people where like Greg is sitting, they couldn't hear anything.
There were no speakers before, that's why.
But now
We have speaker.
we have an idea,
Yes.
hopefully a solution to that, huh?
We have singular speaker for now, and then I think
Excellent,
we will,
excellent. We'll
one
see
day,
how it
maybe
works.
redoing that whole cabinet back different, but
We'll
it's
see. Excellent.
one day.
Are we ready?
Number
Okay.
Those are just minutes.
Let me know when we're on. Could you do me a favor? Could you take those chairs down when you get a chance? There's a reason for my requesting that. I can see who's on the TV, but now I can't.
Perfect.
Thank you.
Thanks, Scott.
We're on, thank you. Good evening, welcome to the Hanover Selectboard meeting of November 21, 2022. We're here tonight to have some fun and do good work for the town. As always, our first order of business is public comment. It is our practice to provide an opportunity for public comment at the start of each meeting. Comments or questions should be directed to me as chair and are limited to 5 minutes so that we can keep the meeting flowing. If your comments are on an agenda item, please hold them until the agenda item comes up. Responses, if any, will be provided at my discretion. Please come to the microphone and state your name and address before you speak. Is there anyone here for public comment? Seeing none, the next order of business is the tax rate discussion and potential setting. Alex, bring us up to date.
So I'll try to give you the short story here. I think most folks and yourself are more familiar than I am with setting the tax rate here in Hanover. Over the last couple weeks or so, we've been going back and forth with DRA at the state to get a preliminary.
Just clarify, because the DRA is...
The DRA is the state agency, the Department of Revenue Administration, that sort of oversees all the local government stuff. What we got back was a preliminary tax rate at the end of last week. And based on some discussions that we've had since then, my impression is that the tax rate came back a little bit higher than what was anticipated. And we spent a little bit of time trying to figure out why. As we all know, we're in a little bit of a challenge with regard to not having a finance director and not having a ton of institutional memory in-house. We do have 2 finance consultants that are now working with us who are helping as well. And basically what we have figured out is that there is a few different options from where we go from here. So the tax rate for the municipal portion came back 7 cents higher than what was expected. And it should be in the report here that we got back for the entire rate $16.47. And again, that was 7 cents higher than what was expected. So the municipal portion was $4.21 is what came back from DRA, and what it sounds like the expectation was from town meeting was $4.16. Is that correct? And so what we've done is a little bit of digging around, and we have some answers and some questions still. And so I don't know, Peter, if you want me to sort of outline like those 3 options that we had talked about, or if there's more that you want me to cover.
Well, I think Bill and I met with Alex today to try to get our hands around this, and we concluded that the input data to the DRA did not reflect what was passed at town meeting, and therefore the discrepancy in the tax rate that came back to us. So now the issue is how do we correct that? And So you're gonna talk about 3 correction options that we could take.
Yeah, and if basically for anybody who's watching, if you want to go another level or 2 of detail into it, the MS 636, which is basically the form that we submit to the state that shows what was adopted at town meeting for the budget, all the appropriations, revenues, all of those numbers, those, as Peter said, do not match the MS 434, which is a separate form that is submitted in September, typically, and that is meant to update anticipated revenues based on what you may have noticed so far in the year. The revenues that were submitted in September that we are now seeing, we don't know why the numbers are what they are, and that may be difficult to find an answer to without the finance director here, who submitted those numbers. That is not a form that goes to the select board for an approval, nor is it a form that I saw, but in the future, I think, even though it's not required from the state level, to avoid kind of coming up at the last minute and sort of realizing that there might be a discrepancy, in the future, when we have a new finance director, we're going to be putting a few more financial controls in place, which will also include, for example, quarterly or monthly reports to the board.
Let me just give the public an example. At town meeting, we proposed a budget that had $100,000 of interest income, very straightforward number. And when it got submitted to the DRA, it was submitted as $50,000. We honestly don't know why. So we need to go back and correct those, and that's just one example of at least a half a dozen or others that have already been identified. So one option is to go back and correct those with the DRA and get a new tax rate from them that is more appropriate with the 416 that we took to town meeting. So that's just one example of the kind of error we're talking about. Very straightforward. Town meeting, 100,000. DRA, 50,000.
And so there's more than a $300,000 difference between what was passed at town meeting and what was submitted to the DRA. I do not think it's the full story of exactly what causes this discrepancy, but it is definitely the majority of it. And we do have 3 different options of what we can do going forward. So the first is to basically revert the numbers back to what town meeting passed. And so those half a dozen or so numbers that show up on this MS 434 form, we could take those numbers and we could just basically undo them, go back to what was passed at town meeting and say, we're going to go with these numbers. The form, the 434, is meant to provide a midway course correction, but based on what we're seeing, we're not sure those numbers are representative of a more accurate prediction of what our revenues would be. It's usually generally better to be conservative with revenue estimates than not, but that's one of the options, which is basically just to rewind the clock back to what town meeting passed and say this is what we anticipate in revenues this year. That's one option. Another option is that we could, and the timing of that option is that we would be able to, if we wanted to have a special meeting a week from tonight and we could get that all done, we could submit the changes back to the state tomorrow. They could rerun their reports and produce a new preliminary tax rate on Wednesday, and then we would have that for Monday. The second option is that we could basically redo the MS 434 process, which would be going back over what was approved at town meeting and then running budget reports and meeting with the department heads responsible for the revenue lines that are shown there, and basically talk about what have we seen so far this year, what are the budgeted versus actuals, what do we predict for the rest of the year, and we could basically try to make our best, most accurate prediction, and basically again sort of like redoing that MS 434 form that is typically done in September. The timing of that is a little challenging because a number of department heads are out on vacation this week, and then of course we have the holidays, so that would require 2 weeks at a minimum from today, so we'd be able to do it on December 5th. Of course, that really starts pushing the tax bills back pretty late, and the other caveat I'll give there is that setting those numbers with the staff that we have internally right now, which is myself and no finance director, seems a little shaky. We just don't have, again, we don't have a lot of institutional memory right now, and so it's going to just be a little hard to make accurate predictions, even with the expertise of the department heads. The third thing that we can do is we could use fund balance that we have, and we could identify the tax rate that the town and town meeting was expecting, which is again about 7 cents off, a little less than that actually, 5 cents off from what we got. And we could basically use that fund balance to plug that gap. We could do that tonight. So it would cost about $140,000 in fund balance. That would bring our fund balance, which I have still yet to completely fully get my brain wrapped around, the town of Hanover fund balance versus, because our reports are a little bit of a mess and we do not have accurate numbers on where our fund balances are right today. But basically, the state of New Hampshire has a definition of fund balance that differs from the town's definition of fund balance. The state of New Hampshire really requires you be above 5%. We're at 6% currently. Using that $140,000 from fund balance would go from 6% to 5.73%, which, as I talked about with the state, the folks at DRA, really from their perspective, there's no difference, right? We don't lose any kind of points going from 6% to 5.73%. And the expectation, of course, would be that the revenues would hopefully be higher than what we're anticipating, because we would be accepting the lower anticipated revenues that are in the MS 434 form currently, right? We're saying, okay, we're just going to go with what's in the form instead of trying to fix all of those numbers, which is going to be really difficult to do, as I just mentioned. We just sort of say, yeah, it's a little bit of a mess in there. We're going to have to really clean this up next year when we have a finance director in place. But in the meantime, we want to set the tax rate at the rate that town meeting expected. Under normal circumstances, I just will give the caveat that I would not recommend using fund balance in that way, but I think that this is not a normal circumstance by any stretch. And we basically have an option to try to figure this all out right now, which holds up the tax bills, and we're doing that without a finance director in place, or we can basically plug the hole for now, get the tax bills out at the rate that the community was expecting, and then we will resolve all of these issues, or start to resolve all of these issues in the winter and spring when we do have a finance director in place. That last option of using fund balance to cover the difference, which is again about $140,000, we could do that tonight and then be off to the races and get the tax bills out. Probably not this week, but next week. So those are the three different overall options. They're not totally satisfying because they don't answer all the questions, which I still have a number of questions myself too, but they do get us on to the next step, get the tax bills out, keep things moving. I did speak with our contact at the DRA. All of those options are options that are doable. You know, we walked through a bunch of the different numbers and concerns, and there was no concern that there was a larger problem or that this would somehow be a mistake or set us up for failure in some sort of way. You know, we walked through the options and it was sort of it's up to the select board, it's up to you all how you want to handle this.
Again, under option 3, we would use the 140,000 because we believe it is not needed, and it will just come back to us.
It's like a loan to ourselves.
It'll come back to us next year when we exceed what we submitted to the DRA. So those questions, it's a little confusing. Bill and I have been on this all day, so.
So just to clarify, when you talk about next year, it's the year we're in.
Right.
So if you take the 140,000 and take that approach, which expedites the process, which gets us the tax bills out, there's a lot of merit to that
Right.
for the taxpayers. But what's the risk? I'm not aware of a risk, because what we are saying in the numbers that were submitted that caused this gap are pretty much, you know, nothing's perfect, but they're pretty solid, that we know we're shorting ourselves based on all, you know, knowing what we know today in November for the rest of this fiscal year, which goes to June 30. So that's, I'm just trying to, you know, so it's, but let's assume for whatever reason, things break the wrong way on the revenue. So then what we were doing is taking another 140,000 out of the undesignated fund balance, which at the current number we have, as of the end of June 30, 22, okay, was, 15% of our, we always talk about 10 to 15% range. So we're up at the higher end. But what we've also done as an exception this year, I don't want to make this more complex than need be, but I think it's important, is that we took out or placed 226,000 out of the undesignated fund balance to get to what we wanted the town to vote on, which was an exception. All the other items listed under the undesignated fund balance are one-time payments for A, B, C, or D. So we already are in the hole, we'll say up 226. So this adds another 140. But on the good news, two things. One is we think our revenue projections are way too low for this year, and we should get that, we should see that money. And number two, as of June 30th, 2022, meaning last fiscal year, we know we have some money left over. Sitting here in the middle of November, we normally would know that number, but we don't. But we know it's a positive. So that's another thing that will break to our favor once we get through the evaluation, get the audit done in December. So two things are going to break the right way. So I come down to what's the risk?
Well,
I'm not aware of too much of a risk, that's all.
I think it's a good question because the risk, I would say in actuality there is no risk because there's no free money or not free money either way, right? If we use fund balance to plug this, it doesn't matter whether it comes from fund balance or if we over anticipate revenues and then we get 140,000 less. Either way, the money still is just basically where it's coming from, with the understanding that what we're doing right now is not setting a precedent for how we're going to do future budgets, right? But it's just solving this one issue in what I think is very accurate to call not normal times. And so I would say the risk is very minimal. It's basically just an accounting risk that we're just going to have to, do you sort of fix it now or fix it later? And the now is just a very challenging time because we don't have the staff person in the position.
Right. And the time limit to get the
and the tax bills, right.
So
If we go back, okay, but option one has us here a week from now, hopefully approving a tax rate and gets the tax bills out by when?
The end of the week, right?
Probably the end of the week.
Which would be December.
December 2 would be the Friday. But
Yeah.
I think, again, I'm just thinking from a staff, if you think you can get them out by the Friday, I'll say great, but I'm just concerned that you're not going to be able to do that, so it's going to knock it out into the following week,
That is possible.
which I think is a possibility.
Right. That is
And
possible.
then the other possible hurdle with that is that we redo it, send it down to DRA, who said, oh, by the way, we're leaving early on Wednesday for the holiday, and we can get to this next Monday. And
That's true.
And
Right.
they may hang, we can't control when they're gonna do it, even though they will do everything they possibly can to get it done.
That is true.
We may not have it Monday night.
That is
That's-
possible.
Kari, I'll get you in a second, but let me just finish up with the board. Any questions? Kari, please. And Kari, thank you for helping us identify
Yeah,
some of
very,
these issues.
very welcome. So yeah, I'm Kari Asmus, Chair of the Finance Committee, but I think I'm also really here tonight as somebody who has just been following these conversations and processes for probably almost 2 decades now. So what I wanted to point out listening to your discussion is that, first of all, thank you to the town manager for changing the process where this is the first year where it's actually coming back to you for a vote. It's not actually required. It hasn't been done before. I think it's a good practice, but if you were to vote tonight on one of the 3 options, I don't know that there is nothing that would require you to come back tonight. So you could start to move forward on any of the 3 options. Perhaps our new town manager would like to disagree with that, but based on past practice, that would be something for you to consider. What I would say, in the past, the way this was handled, we would sometimes ask the town manager and new folks, are you sure that these revenue numbers are solid, that they're not a little bit ambitious? And I would say of them, the only one that's sort of ambitious is the motor vehicles, that is jumping up by, 100,000 or so. And the answer that we always got, and that was sort of the handshake, that we had, was that, no, we think they are going to materialize, but if they don't, in that event, we will rein in spending, as opposed to either relying on fund balance or having a higher tax rate or anything else. The thing that I think is in your favor is that, looking at these revenue numbers, they are quite realistic, but already since budget time, that you're getting over $155,000 in addition from, am I right about that? I think I am. Yes, $155,000 from the state. So that kind of covers you if those revenues are a little bit soft. That's additional meals and rooms tax, distribution, a little bit more in the highway block grant. And then I have to say, one of the things that I didn't highlight on this form, because I was just comparing the 636 to the 434, was that under payment in lieu of taxes, the budget actually adopted an amount of 87,000, not 22,000. So there's another 65,000 there that would help cover any shortfalls in revenue. So what I am saying is that I think that your option one, which is what you've always done in the past, you had your town meeting revenues, and that's what you stuck with no matter what. You didn't in January come back and get the department heads together and say, is this still realistic? You went with it, and that's put the town in pretty good stead, all of these years. We've never, had a problem. And then again, when I'm already seeing that, you've got more revenues and an underreporting of one revenue, which would be maybe one that you would change. I think your option one is good. The thing with drawing on undesignated fund balance is that we don't actually know what the undesignated fund balance is right now. We think that I would say based on what we knew 6 months ago, that probably you could use that and we would still be around the 15% mark in the general fund. I don't know that that's the case for the fire fund, which would also be impacted. That is a fund that has a harder time replenishing itself because it never gets the advantage of these sort of serendipity amounts from the state or whatever. So you'd have to think about not only what is the impact on the general fund, undesignated fund balance, but also the fire fund.
Well, how do those two connect, Carl? If we take it from the general fund, why would the fire fund change at all?
Well, because they're also missing revenues. So you would also have to take some money from the fire fund, undesignated fund balance, to make it whole. And they don't have as robust of a fund balance.
I don't get that one. You get it.
I get it.
No,
It's sort of,
everything we've talked about, just again,
But I think it's probably a smaller number, Carol.
it is a smaller
It's a
number
much smaller number.
because it's a smaller fund.
Yep.
But it would impact it, and again, given that we don't really know what the undesignated fund balances are, I'm just saying we have more of an unknown than we might in other years, and would be a reason to also go with option number one as opposed to option number three. I mentioned, for example, also at the Finance Committee meeting when I was looking at last spring's MS 636, that it showed that we had gotten $76,000 in land use change money. That's supposed to be split between the, the conservation fund, and and the land and capital improvements fund. So they're supposed to get $76,000 combined. Combined, they got 10,000. So I'm thinking that 66,000 may be counted still as undesignated fund balance, but actually it's designated to them, but it didn't get transferred to them. So I'm just feeling, to be honest, like we really don't know where that undesignated fund
I think I'm
balance
pretty
is.
confident that at least the general fund, undesignated fund balance is just gonna be fine. It's just gonna be fine.
Well,
And
okay,
whether we,
but we don't
the
know if
fire
there's.
districts, I don't know about.
Right, the fire district we don't know about, and we don't know if there's other overstatements of the undesignated fund balance, because there've been so many questions
But
in
if we
so many
took-
areas.
If we tried to make up the entire difference from the general fund. So
Yeah,
okay, let's just be back. We have a certain tax rate that we want to get back to, which is the one that the town meeting approved. If we use the general fund only to get us back there, I think we'd be safe, wouldn't we?
well, you can't use general fund monies for the fire fund.
No, I won't, but I'm
Yeah.
just gonna leave the fire fund alone.
Well, but it's, if you look at, on the tax rate breakdown that we got from,
Yeah.
the section that's here for the fire fund,
Mhm.
the total number here is a higher number than what was adopted at town meeting. So to meet DRA's higher number here, you'd have to draw on their fund.
I'll take that as a given. Okay, so that's another thing that we should, we are anxious to get the tax bills out on time, or as quickly as we can. The last time we failed at that, it really hit the fan because it was also a reassessment year. And some people got very significant changes to their tax bill than what they were expecting. I don't think that's the case this time.
No.
So if we get the bills out a little bit later, if people have been planning on whatever increase they were expecting from town meeting and the school board meetings, they're gonna be pretty close. And
And-
so it's not the same level of urgency as we had 2 years ago when they were also being hit with a reassessment that significantly impacted their tax bills in a way that they wanted to be able to plan for and weren't able to. So that's a little bit of a mitigation. Joanna?
In option one, how, do you have adequate staff to be able to put the budget that we approved in May
Yeah.
into the form and get it to the state tomorrow?
Yeah, there's basically like 6 or 7 different revenue lines that we would just update, and I have the numbers because I have the 636, and so I can see the discrepancy. I think you noted them on your email too. Like it's clear where the discrepancies are. I might agree with Kari about the motor vehicle one registrations, because that was put in a lot higher than what we collected last year. And that was something that DRA mentioned as well, that they were kind of saying, well, why is that higher? I said, I have no idea what the justification is. So, but we also don't, there's a $324,000 difference between the 636 and the 434. So we actually don't have to do all of that to bring the rate down to the point where, so basically we could do the changes not including the motor vehicle registration fees. We could leave that as is at 1.5 million. Do the rest, and that will still bring the tax rate down to the place that we're looking at.
I think to answer your question, we're not talking about.
A lot of work.
No, it's not.
We're
It's
not
not.
talking about
Yeah.
changing 100 items. We're talking about changing less than 10
Yeah.
to get us where we need to get to.
So, but I do think that it feels to me that we need to get the tax bills out by the 5th of, by that Monday, right, by December 5th. I think that's what I had in my head. People have been asking me, I said, well, they should be out by December 5th. That's what I told my mom. So if we don't get the tax rate back by Monday, the 29th, 28th, whatever a week from Monday is.
Week from tonight.
Yeah, a week from today. Do we go to option 3?
Well,
You don't need a vote by
We
us.
don't,
yeah, I mean, if that's the case, if the board were to vote to authorize me to submit those changes to the DRA, and then where there's not a statutory requirement to come back and vote again to finalize it, then we could do that tonight and we'd be off.
off to
And-
the races.
Yeah, and that's beyond my knowledge of what the statutory requirements are or aren't. But it sounds like that's not the case, and that the authorization now would be enough on my end to go into DRA. And in fact, I mean, it would, well, that's another,
Okay.
yeah.
My
So-
caveat that would be is, I would expect the DRA rate to come back at around the $4.16 that we presented at town meeting. So if they come back with something significantly different than that, I mean, if tonight you can vote to have 416, I guess, is that what you're saying, Alex?
Well, the way that I would say, yeah, I think this will be fine, and because there's a calculator on the DRA website that I'm doing right now, and I think if you authorized me to make the changes, to change the revenue lines, and we can identify them one by one if we want to, just so it's in the record, and not the motor vehicle ones, I believe that will bring us to a 4.15 rate.
And I would argue we should not, we had a logic for doing the motor vehicle one back in November. I would not challenge that without knowing why. So I would put that in at the 176 or whatever it is.
So just revert them all.
Just revert back to what we did at town meeting.
Yeah.
Because we don't have any new information that would make me change my mind from that.
And if we did that, that takes us to a lower rate than what we were anticipating. That's gonna bring us to 409 or 410.
Well, I think we need to be right around 414. And the reason I'm saying that is because if we do generate some surplus this year, Lord knows we're gonna need it going into next year's budget. Next year's budget is gonna be extremely challenging. So I think we should do whatever it takes to get to the 416 number, is my,
I don't know if I have a way to translate that, right? Because we're not setting a tax rate, we're determining what the revenues are. And so if you're saying, well, we're not gonna question town meeting and we're gonna revert to the revenues, that's an all or no, I think that's an all, unless I'm misunderstanding it, that's an all or nothing. The only way that we could do that is leave out that motor vehicle line, which I do, that is the only one that jumps out at me, as that was, when I went back and looked at the budget and actuals, and that's the only one that the state mentioned and said, that one is oddly high.
yep.
And then that does get us to about 415.
I'll back off of that then.
Okay.
Yeah. And I would just say that it was raised, if you remember, we had the dual adoption last year, and we were looking for how to close that gap. And it was when looking for that gap that it was raised by the $174,000. And so that was a little bit under maybe, yes. So I think that the plan of sticking with what's there.
Okay,
So wait a minute, so I'm a little confused,
Okay.
sorry. So we're going to stick with the revenues that we projected for town meeting, with the exception of the motor vehicle one, which was, we all agree was a little high, a little aggressive. And Alex, do you feel okay with that?
I feel better about that than trying to do option 2.
Okay,
Which
so
is basically-
option 2 is off the table. I
Yeah,
think
which is
we all-
basically us trying to basically redoing that process and really trying to predict the revenues. I feel like, there's no way we could produce numbers that I could defend.
We all agree.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so this one, I mean, I can't defend I wasn't here for town meeting,
Yeah.
but there was obviously a lot of process that went into getting to these numbers. And so I can read out the ones that we're talking about, just to make sure we're all on the same page. So it's the interest on investments, which was set originally at 100,000 and was moved down to 50,000, that's one. The next is, let's see. there's some, well, I'll say, there's some,
I don't think we need to specify them here. I think. your motion-
So I move that we revert to our town, well, we resubmit according to what we approved at town meeting, with the exception of the revenue that, the revenue for motor vehicle registrations.
okay,
Is that clear enough?
You got it?
I can do that.
Do I hear a second?
So second.
Just-
Further discussion?
So the motor vehicle amount would be then what?
The motor vehicle amount is gonna be what's in the 434, which is 1.5 million.
Right, so you're gonna go with that. Okay.
Yeah, and then that's gonna get us close, it's gonna get us somewhere around $4.15 or $4.16 as the tax rate.
Great.
Which is, so let's be clear in that, I guess, can I amend my own, but just get to 416,
Well,
Yeah,
right?
Okay, we'll be back here next Monday.
well, what we're saying is
No,
we're not,
We don't
yeah,
need to be,
yeah.
Okay.
unless
go ahead
something
and-
goes south,
Right.
but, you
I'm
know,
gonna
we all
resubmit
wanna
everything
eat
tomorrow.
Thanksgiving turkey, we don't wanna be,
Right.
Okay,
Talking
keep us
about it.
informed as to what comes back after having,
Okay,
what we just
Right.
described.
so you'll let us know,
yep, I will,
okay?
yep.
Are you
Okay,
gonna
any
vote
more
on the
discussion?
motion?
Hearing none, all those in favor of that motion?
Aye.
Thank
Good
you.
job. Thank you,
Thanks,
Carl.
thanks for your help.
Thank you,
Thank you very
Finance
much.
Committee, that's why we all work together.
Okay, so that's good. I think that really is good. Can we go home now? Okay.
No, we've
Okay.
got another 10 items here.
So the next item,
Plus more.
plus more. The recommendation to set public hearing for Monday, December 5th, to consider amendment to the rates and fee schedule to discuss proposed billing changes for Hovey Lane and Lebanon Street permits,
Parking permits.
parking permits. Do I hear a motion to set that hearing?
I'll move that we set that hearing on December 5th.
Anyone want to second that?
So second?
Discussion. Sounds to me like they just want to make one change and they need to make it from a 2-month fee to a 1-month fee.
That's right,
That's
But
why
it's
we're
the
gonna
same
do it.
rate.
same rate,
Same rate?
yeah.
Okay.
It's weird that we have to have a public hearing on that, but let's,
Why not?
why not?
Plow through that bureaucracy.
Okay,
Yes.
so, any more questions? Hearing none, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Approved. Okay, request for additional funds for the home for the holidays. So you want to bring us up to speed on this one?
Sure, and there's a memo in the agenda packet from our Public Works Director, or sorry, Parks and Rec Director, that we are asking for $2,000 from the Brissette Fund. That additional funding is going to, I don't remember the different pieces of equipment, top of my head. There's a couple different, let's see,
It was lights,
lighting,
decorations.
pole banners and cables
Christmas
and
trees.
trees. And so these are things that John indicated are basically one-time purchases that would be used for many years in the event. And we discussed that that is sort of within the scope of Brissette, and it was a small enough request that I wanted to include it. And that when we had discussed where to focus our energies event-wise, we had sort of picked Home for the Holidays to focus in on. And so it seemed to make sense, $2,000 to go towards that. So that's what we're bringing to the board.
I'm okay with it, but I think next year, Reset Fund should not be involved in these activities. I think this is maybe the third year
I think so,
Reset Fund
yeah.
has stepped in. It's getting real close to just being normal town expenses, which was not the intent of the Reset Fund.
Right.
So for $2,000, I think we should just go ahead and do it, but I think we should realize that
Can't come back next year.
can't go back next year.
Yeah, if we want this, we've got to put it in the budget.
Just gotta put it in.
Yeah.
And I guess just for the public, there's been a lot of discussion with the trustees relative to the management of the Reset Fund. And they will be recommending, I believe, to us, that we reduce our expenditure level for next year to somewhat reflect the fact that the market is down, and let us recover more quickly. So, and I've said we would certainly entertain that idea. So instead of 4%, we may be looking at a 3% bogey for next year. And we've spent very aggressively from the Brissette Fund this past year, so we don't have a lot of leeway.
But we haven't overspent,
No, we have not
to
overspent.
be clear.
We have not overspent. No, we're still 100 shy, about around $100,000 shy of what we could have, what we could still spend.
Right.
And now we're $98,000 shy. But, so no, we've not overspent, but in respect for the fact that we want to maintain the purchasing power of that fund, we may have to cut back a little bit next year to let it recover from the
From the
20% decline that everyone's experiencing, and it is too. So that's just an update. So, could I hear a motion to recommend the 2020% fund?
Oh, so move.
I'll second that.
Okay. Further discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor?
Aye.
Okay. Discussion of Upper Valley Business Alliance request for free holiday parking. We've done this
Annual
before.
request, yeah, this is how many years?
I assume it's been welcomed and successful and
Yep.
worthy of doing again. Is that accurate?
That is my impression.
That's your impression?
Yes.
So do I hear a motion to that effect?
I move that we approve the relaxation or no cost parking for the holiday weekends between now and, it's actually now and Christmas.
Between Thanksgiving and
Thanksgiving and Christmas. So it's Friday, Saturday, Thanksgiving, Friday and Saturday of this week. And then the following 3 Saturdays, right? Is that right? Some people know.
I just talked about 5 Saturdays in the wording.
You gotta look at the calendar.
Yeah,
It's not a Friday issue, it's just a Saturday issue. That's the way it's
So we
worded.
charge them on the 25th of November, which is the Friday.
Yeah, the request was for Saturday 26, December 3, December 10, December 17, and December 24,
Okay,
based upon her memo.
okay, thanks.
Okay, so that's what the motion is to
Free parking on Saturdays,
free parking on those 5
5
Saturdays.
Saturdays, the next 5 Saturdays in a row.
That's right, the next 5. Okay, and there was a second to that?
I'll second.
Okay, further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor?
Aye.
5 Saturdays it will be.
Come to town.
With your wallet.
Donations to the Etna Library. Probably should have listed all these, we have several. You have them listed, Alex?
I have-
yeah,
there's- There are 3?
Is it in your transmittal?
yes, one from the Muriel E. and Edward C. Wachter, not sure if I'm gonna say these right, Charitable Foundation, that's for $500 towards non-town funded projects. Or towards the Jerry Nunnally Memorial Lecture Series, and one from Mary Lib Triplett on behalf of Hank Smith in the amount of $50, and one from William Kearney and Emily Donnellan in the amount of $50.
I move we graciously and thankfully accept those donations.
On behalf of the Etna Library.
On behalf of the Etna Library,
So second.
the town library,
The town library.
which is at Jim. Okay, I move, did you
And I
second?
seconded it, yes.
Further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor?
Aye.
We gratefully accept those donations. Banner request, Dartmouth College, 2030 Martin Luther King celebration. We have room for those?
You do.
Okay, is there a motion to accept that banner request?
So move.
Second?
Further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
We've accepted the banner request. Minutes of the November 7th. I did not have any additions or corrections.
Nor did I.
Nor did I.
That's fine.
I move we approve the minutes of November 7th.
I'll second.
Further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
We've approved the minutes. Administrative report.
Okay.
Besides working on tax rates, what might you?
Yes, that took up a little bit of the time. We have, I got a couple different updates here. So first is on human resources and staffing. So we, last month, we lost 0 people and hired 2. Year to date, we have hired 52 and lost 40. And so we did talk about that a little bit in the last meeting. That's a big number. And there's a couple different pieces of that I want to follow up on. So there's kind of a bunch of HR related updates this month. So the first is that our HR director, Dave Stewart, is leaving full-time employment with us as of December 16th. So we thank Dave for years of service to the town and really appreciate that. He's going to be available in a part-time capacity for the month of January to help transition, hopefully, to a new hire. We did create the job posting, and it was posted last week, and that is available at hanovernh.org/employment. And we will be beginning interviews, if not this week, probably not this week, probably next week. The next is a salary study update. So we have some draft data that's starting to come back from MRI. I haven't seen the data yet. We haven't met or gone through anything, but we will be doing that in the next week or two, and believe that we are on track right now to having the study done in about the next month. And then once we have the internal data collected and back to us, we're going to speak with department heads, speak with the select board, and then complete the study, and then it will become part of our annual budgeting process and compensation and class structure and collective bargaining unit negotiations, and be a public document as well beyond that. The next is the collective bargaining negotiations. We have begun those just in our sort of first introductory meetings, and that will, I think we're pretty optimistic that a lot of the changes that we want to make this year about compensation and employment in Hanover to make us just a more competitive employer, we're going to be able to include the collective bargaining unit sort of in that process. We're also working on a sort of HR vision and goals document. I think every podcast, every meeting, I've talked about sort of hiring and staffing issues. There's going to be a lot happening. There's already a lot happening. There's going to continue to be a lot happening over the subsequent years. And so what I thought would be a good idea is just to put together a sort of overview, probably for the next meeting in December, of just what some of the vision is, what some of the goals are, short, medium, and long term, and just make sure we're all on the same page, the public's aware, the staff is aware, what direction are we kind of heading in here, and what is the framework for how we're going to be approaching how we employ people in the future. And then another thing that I just wanted to kind of point out, and there's not a ton to talk about here, but over the last month, 2 of our neighboring towns in Vermont lost their town managers. There's another, a bit of a drama that seems to be playing out in another town in Vermont where almost their entire select board has resigned due to a kind of staffing and hiring issue in town. I think that a lot of the challenges that we face, especially the housing challenges, are regional. And I've been talking with a lot of my colleagues in other communities, and we're just trying to brainstorm ways. The more stability we have, from a sort of management perspective, the more long term we can think about and work on policies and programs together. And it's just I mentioned this in the post that I wrote maybe a month or 2 back about hiring issues, that some of the town managers had identified that they've lost staff because of challenging civic environments with members of the public. And I think that we are in a pretty good place here in Hanover, but it's just worth noting how important that is as far as retaining staff. That people are, if they're getting harassed online at a government job and they can go work in the private sector and they don't have to do that, that's a strong benefit. And so I think just thinking about ways that we can kind of all work together as communities in the region is just important, and trying to sort of lift everybody up and create civic environments that help make employees feel welcomed and kind of part of the community. It just seems important. On to our own kind of hiring in the budget process. So we are in the very, very final steps of hiring a finance director. We will have an offer out in the next day before Thanksgiving. And we are excited about that. We do have 2 consultants who are working with us, one who has been working with us for about a month or 2, and the other who started last week and is coming in first in-person day tomorrow. That person is also going to help transition the new finance director into the position. One of the things that has happened here in a few staff handoffs is the handoffs don't go super well. I was very lucky to get to spend time with my predecessor, and that was very valuable, but not every person has got that. And so this person is going to help kind of bridge those 2 pieces a little bit. And they're also going to be working with me on getting the budget process going. So we've had a few internal meetings with some of the staff and department heads that have been more involved in the budget process, just thinking about what we can and can't do, scaling down a little bit of the scope, but we are going to be beginning that in the next week or 2. And I will have an update about that on December 5th, and hopefully we can have the finance committee join again, and I'm going to reach out to some other stakeholders as well. But that will be sort of the beginning of the budget process, and so we're going to be about a month late. We were intending on doing that on the November 7th meeting, and then we pushed that back for lack of the finance director. Let's see, a general election update. So I included some numbers in here from our town clerk. If folks want to look at that. One of the things I will say, which is amazing, and a big endorsement of same-day voter registration, is the number of people who register the day they go to vote. That was just surprising how many people do that, and you just think about these hundreds of people. Granted, perhaps they would have registered sooner if that option weren't available, but we really don't know. And it's kind of crazy to think that we might have lost out on all of those votes had we not had same-day voter registration, so that's great. And so I want to thank all of our staff and the volunteers for that.
That was around 800.
Yeah, I think that's right. Yeah, 797, yes, so that's pretty cool. And
Out of 5,600.
yeah, right, it's a big percent, right.
Yeah.
Not only a big number, but a big percent.
We looked, as we worked that day, we looked over to the same-day registrations, and there was always, seemed like there was always 25, 50 people.
Right.
Steady
doing-
line.
And so it's about 800 before the day closed. Wonderful.
Yeah, it is, it is. And we're gonna be spotlighting either this month or next month. We're gonna do sort of a panel of election staff and officials. Our town moderator, town clerk, one of the supervisors of the checklist, 1 or 2 volunteers, ballot clerks, and we're gonna just talk about how elections work, how they get put together, all the work that goes in behind the scenes. And then potentially Dave Scanlon, the Secretary of State, will join us on that day or a different day depending on schedules. And we're going to have a conversation about sort of the future of elections in New Hampshire. Where are we going? How do we maintain and increase trust and credibility in the elections? What role does technology play? All these different interesting things. So I think that will be in a future Hanover Happenings podcast. But wanted to spotlight all of the, and at least let people know a little bit more about all the amazing work that goes into putting the elections on. But also I think about where we're going, which will be kind of interesting.
Alex, may I interrupt?
Sure.
For me, having served for almost 8 years, the best day of serving as an elected official is voter day. It's an amazing moment where people come in, first-time voters. I had an elderly woman, she had just naturalized as a U.S. citizen. She had 2 canes and was not super steady on her feet. And I said, oh, you know, your partner can put the ballot in the voter box. And she was like, this is the first time I'm voting here. I'm doing it myself, you know. And it was an amazing day. And I just think that, you know, we can have these really dreary outlooks, but the students were awesome. Everyone was in it.
All those bright-eyed.
Students,
make sure
older people, younger people, little kids getting their stickers. It was awesome. It was a really great day. And I don't know if you guys saw in the Times yesterday, there was a piece on New Hampshire voting that was quite interesting. And if you're, as kind of backup to the podcast that you do, it's I think it was Scanlon's election committee, and made up of 50% Republicans, 50% Dems, and maybe in New Hampshire, maybe it was at 1/3, 1/3, and 1/3 independents, looking at how to make elections more transparent in the state. And it's a really good piece, I think. So anyway, just a plug for,
The New York Times said, look to New Hampshire.
yeah, that was.
Yeah, I'm
the-
looking at this is really interesting.
Look to
yeah.
New Hampshire, so.
And we had,
Anyway.
just help my, we had like 80 volunteers that day.
Yeah,
Yeah.
That's what it takes, 80 volunteers to pull off that election.
So,
And we're talking, plus 10 or so people working really hard way before that
Right.
election to make it happen.
and starting their day really early.
We've been staying really late.
Yeah. So,
Okay,
anyway,
good.
thanks.
Yeah, appreciate, yeah, that's great. Let's see, a couple other things. So we're going to be putting back together, I've gotten a few different comments and complaints. I think we have as well, a couple of you about speeding, traffic, different kind of issues like that, to try to handle some of these complaints in a more orderly and organized fashion. There was like a traffic safety committee that was like an internal staff working group that met. I think it's been a number of years since the group has met, but it was town manager, police chief, planning director, and public works director that would meet. We're going to restart those meetings and have a quarterly kind of internal working group. So if we get different issues about the speeding or a request for a crosswalk or a street light, we can basically have people fill out a form, it'll go into a queue, they'll know when the next time it'll be discussed is, the right internal stakeholders will be there, we'll invite the people in, we can have a conversation about it, and it'll just create a little bit more of an orderly and planned way to deal with some of these things, which has felt a little bit ad hoc on my end. And then when talking about that with some of the staff, they said, you know, we used to have this committee in place, it hasn't met in 6 or 7 years, but it used to be helpful. And so I looked over the old policy and it looked pretty good, and so we're gonna get that going again, which should just make it a little easier to handle some of those requests and deal with things on more of a policy level, not on sort of a one-off basis. So if anybody does, if any member of the public is watching or listening, then you just reach out to me. We haven't put the forms and stuff back together, but we can get you that once we get going there, which will be shortly. Next is downtown Hanover, which is probably what I'm going to start calling this. I've been using also community economic development as a label. We've been really lucky to have some great business owners and some other stakeholders come out to. We've had 2 meetings now of this group that has been between 10 and 15 people. And what we wanted to do is basically exploring ways that the town and other stakeholders can support the business community, and especially the downtown business community. And this is in cooperation with the UVBA, and I think very complementary to what they do, but it's a slightly different scope. And so this group got together and we basically ironed out a timeline of what issues we want to work on and identified the 4 issues. And so I'll just read those out. I'm kind of excited that we're going to be working on these topics. And the idea, each of these topics we've broken out into 2 2-hour meetings. The first meeting is only to talk about needs and problems. The second 2-hour meeting is to talk about solutions. So the first topic that was identified from the business community, these all were identified in the meetings with business owners about what is sort of the most important. So the first topic is what regional entities and stakeholders impact the downtown and why. So this includes Dartmouth College, the UVBA, and others. How do they engage with the downtown and vice versa? So what are those relationships like? The topic number 2 is how do we use our resources, such as public space, to attract more people to the downtown? Who are those people and why do they come here? And can we make the downtown more welcoming? And so that is going to cover a bunch of different topics, kind of about branding and marketing, but also outdoor dining and public spaces, and who is coming to the downtown and who isn't coming to the downtown, and are there audiences out there that we want to come here who aren't, and why? Number 3 is exploring and understanding the adverse impacts on the downtown from outside policymakers, such as the town, the college, state, federal government, and opportunities for improvement. The way, and I didn't feel like this was the right way to word this here, but the way that I sort of framed it when we talk about it is, tell us everything that we're doing wrong. You know, and that we just want to get all the feedback. Some of that is, and some of all of these are complementary to the master plan process, which is a little bit more strategic. And the way we sort of talked about in these meetings is this is a little bit more tactical in some ways, is a little bit more short term, though I think we're going to touch on and overlap some of those issues. But, you know, are there policies the town has in place, and I think there are a couple, that limit or in some way or have an adverse impact that we're not aware of on businesses, or things that businesses want to do. And so, parking minimums in the downtown is a great example. Does that make it difficult for people who own property to do redevelopment? So that's one, and then the last one is, which everybody really wanted, and I think this is going to be a great last topic for this group, is how do we sustain this participation and the management of this going forward? Everybody was really interested in this not being a one-off conversation, and when we were looking at, it was a downtown vision plan from about
2003,
2003 you said?
I think so.
I think so, and it was Dave Anderson who's emailed that link around to a few of us and said, it's funny, some of these things that we're looking at are things that we already talked about. And I think all of us, and there's some history, apparently there may have been an improvement district at one point, there may have been a TIF at one point, there's been different things, but how do we organize and sustain all this involvement and participation in the downtown? How do we create something that's going to be sustainable?
There is still a TIF,
For the parking garage?
Yeah.
Right, okay. So those are the topics. I'm pretty excited. We've got a couple business owners who are really committed here. The college is participating on a few different levels. We have students, members of the administration, a handful of different business owners who have a varied perspective. Not everybody agrees on, parking, for example. And so I think that having a few different perspectives is going to be really valuable. So I'll keep everybody updated on that. Next is a sustainability update. There's a couple updates from Yolanda and Judy at Sustainable Hanover. And so the window insulating inserts that help people reduce energy costs or fuel usage in the winter. There is a video about that. There's a link in the report. They had 70 volunteers that fit almost 300 inserts, which is pretty cool. And so I know that they prioritized folks who were facing economic hardships to help them on heating bills over the winter, but that is pretty cool. And so there's a number here which is basically on average 10 inserts save 105 gallons of heating oil. So that's pretty significant. And so that is a great event. We thank them and all the volunteers for doing that. And I know they had signed up in shifts. I mean, it was a pretty significant effort.
It was really well organized.
Yes, it was, yeah.
Cover, right?
What's that? Yes.
With cover.
Yeah.
A concert with cover.
Yep. Couple more updates there about some work that Sustainable Hanover is doing with Dartmouth and looking at the Our Green Future at Dartmouth College. And so hopefully, I think we will continue to see some good work there between Sustainable Hanover and between the college as they embark on some of their more ambitious sustainability goals. And then the last update from them is, as the aggregation committee, they're continuing to support the work of the Community Power Coalition of New Hampshire to enable our community power program. And so there's a lot of stuff happening, especially Pete and April, and obviously a lot of support from the select board. That is going to be pretty interesting to see how this plays out. I know this is something I've mentioned to folks just over the last couple of weeks. It's come up a few times in conversations when people that I've caught up with, colleagues from New Jersey or other places, and we talk about, well, what kind of sustainability stuff are you guys working on in Hanover? And of course mention our solar field and mention this, and people are very impressed with these goals that we are, the odds that we hit the goals by 2030 seem very, very high, which is pretty exciting. And in fact, we may be done before that. Yeah, which is pretty cool.
Well, let's be clear. Peter and I are going to have issues here. The goal was for the entire town. Our goal, our ambition was to be by 2030 off, on renewable electric, and by 2050 off of carbon. That was the goal, and we felt that we could only make it happen from a town perspective. But it's a community-wide goal, and we have a long way to get to 20, and Dartmouth is the biggest one.
Right.
To get us there by 2030. I think if we look through the notes, Peter, that's what it says.
Tomorrow, my solar field is being installed.
Burr.
So, burn on
Awesome.
that, but hopefully by 2 weeks from now, I will no longer be on fossil fuel. Between heat pumps and 2 solar arrays, I'm hoping, and my kids really encourage this, to be off of fossil fuels. So that's what you're talking about. It's not
Yep.
just the town, it's all
It's all
of
of
us
us
doing whatever
doing
we can do.
A couple other short updates is some of the regional collaboration efforts that I've been working on. I got to do a lot of that at the New Hampshire Municipal Association Conference, which was last week, which is where I got, I'm joking, this is where I got that. It's very rowdy, this group of municipal managers, but just kidding. This is my own fault, landscaping. But that was really fun to go down there and meet a lot of other managers that I've been emailing and Zooming with. You know, I've had these monthly Zoom calls about hiring issues. We've had 3 now, that we've had maybe 15 or 20, 25 people attend all together. And it was fun to actually meet some of those folks in person, go to some of the sessions. One of the things I do want to do is try to get more staff down there next year. That was something that we always did a lot of in New Jersey, at least in South Orange. We had a pretty big staff show, and it's just really fun to be off campus, to go to the sessions, compare notes with each other, go out to dinner afterwards. And that's just one of those things. I would really like to encourage more professional development and networking. We did have some folks down there, and so that was really fun. And there's just been a lot of really interesting movements here. So for example, I don't think I mentioned this in the last meeting, but we have a meeting that Vital Communities facilitates with a couple different towns in the Upper Valley here. I think historically it's been ourselves, Lebanon, Hartford, Norwich. We're also now adding Claremont and Enfield into that, and that is going to be really exciting too. And then myself and Lebanon and Claremont, we've been talking a lot, especially about transit access and other things, of ways to basically reduce the distance between our communities, because they each offer really unique and kind of valuable things, very different but very complementary in many ways. And so that's another thing that I've been spending a lot of time with the college and with Advanced Transit, is just trying to find ways to bring people together to think about ways that we can work to expand public transit access in the region. I know that's part of the Advanced Transit 5-year plan as well, but it's one of the #1 complaints that I hear from realtors and other folks, that people moving here, especially young people who want to kind of go out on the weekends, they can't really do that because the buses, stop running around 6 or so and don't run on the weekends. And obviously from an employer standpoint, if we had buses that ran at different hours and on the weekends, that makes it a lot easier to get people to work here. And one of the things that I would love to figure out how to do, this doesn't impact us too much, but it's just one of the thoughts as far as some of our human resources efforts as well. Wouldn't it be great to be able to basically commit as an organization that you don't need to own a car to work for the town? Whereas right now, if you don't live in town, it would be very challenging to do that. And that would be kind of a cool thing to be able to say. So anyway, those are just a few other updates. A lot of regional collaboration and work happening, and I'm pretty excited about all of those. The NHMA conference was great, and I'm actually in a couple weeks going to a municipal managers conference in Portsmouth. This is also a good chance for me. The NHMA conference was in Manchester, and so I'm finally getting out and getting around the state a little bit, which is also nice. And that's it.
Great.
So I have a quick question. You said we're almost ready to ink the contract on a finance director,
To make an offer, yeah.
to make an offer. Do you have any concerns, since you keep mentioning housing, been a constant topic for us? The individual to whom you are going to make an offer, do we have any concerns that when they come to town, they will turn around and say, whoa, I
Nancy.
didn't know this.
Yeah.
I would say I can't speak to specifics about that, but because I don't want to. But I will say it is a concern, and among people that we have interviewed for this position and other positions, people look pretty early, it seems like. If they get past the first interview, they go on Zillow, and then they're like, whoa, that's not what I was expecting.
That's all I want to know.
So
Thank you very
with this offer, I think we're going to be okay.
much.
But it is a concern.
That's the end of my question.
Yeah.
I apologize for.
No, it's okay. Yeah.
Okay.
I'm not even-
Selectboard reports. Joanne? Sorry.
What,
Selectboard reports.
yes, the Sustainability Master Plan Committee met on November 15th. We have now received 4 of the 8 chapters of the plan from our consultant. I would say that we are less than pleased with what we've received for materials, and our staff is working with the consultant very closely to get a product that is more acceptable to what we're looking for. The chapters that we've received are on climate change, housing, the economy, and transportation, and they all need a fair amount of work. I think we had expectations of a really tight, concise, readable, usable document, and we need to work hard with our consultants. So unfortunately, but we hope to have at least one chapter ready to post online within a couple weeks. I think that was where we left it. But the product hasn't been worth posting, so which is very disappointing. So we're working on that. But our next meeting is on the 29th of November. It's at 5 o'clock. People are welcome to come. It's in this room. So, and there's usually good snacks. And that's all I have to report.
Your planning board chose a brisk Thursday afternoon, noon, for November 17th for their walkthrough. And it was open to the public. The planning board was the focus. Dartmouth College was our host for the North End housing complex. It is fully staked with colored stakes, although you would want a Dartmouth colleague to walk with you to be able to know what colors mean and to help get you oriented. But it was very well attended by both planning board and members of the community, and it is the next step in planning board considering that North End housing project. It was very interesting.
I'll report that the Conservation Commission met, and we had a wonderful presentation about the role of old growth forests relative to the environment. And I'll just quickly summarize. There's a lot of sort of common beliefs. Well, let me just go back. Most forestry management has been built around how to maximize revenue from forests, which puts you on a 40-year cycle of harvesting and planting. And that turns out not to be what is best for the environment. And indeed, one could argue that what's best for the environment is don't cut down any trees, let everything go to old growth. So the commission will be looking at that seriously relative to how we manage our town forests, and also potentially to help educate the public about what they might want to be doing with their own. So it was a very interesting conversation, and I can also say we met, the Trescott board met, and there was a similar kind of conversation about how to manage the Trescott forest. So Trescott will be re-upping our management plan, forest management plan, and part of that will be a discussion of that issue. What do you let go to old growth? What do you harvest? When do you do it? Why do you do it? And what's the trade-off relative to the environment? It's just a whole new way of looking at how to do forest management. That was exciting.
Yeah, we had a conversation, the Hanover Conservancy Lands Committee met this afternoon and talked about it. And, you know, the town with faculty, with timber management people, with, I don't know, there were like 5 people, it was a Zoom of about 10. Half of them had this expertise, you know, this carbon sequestration, understanding the value of an 80-year-old tree versus a 10-year-old tree. And we were throwing around ideas, and we're like, you know, we've got our energy coalition, you know, Hanover's gonna buy its own energy. Maybe we should be doing, you know, some kind of carbon sequestration credits or something, and, you know, to encourage people to, you know, save the big old trees, because that's where we're getting the most bang for the buck, right? So anyway, it's just interesting that, you know, we have a little, that we're learning about, and it's changing all the time.
Yeah.
It's really fascinating.
A lot of sort of common thoughts have been not proven true.
Right.
They're being challenged now.
Yep. Interesting.
Bill, sorry, Bill.
Just share, yesterday the Parks and Rec Department sponsored the annual Turkey Trot, a 5K, 10K race, and I was there as a volunteer, non-runner. But it was a hearty crowd, a cross-section of age, skill, and the wind chill was very attention-getting. But in the middle of it, you had the experience to really have the full flavor of outing in New Hampshire is a snow squall that lasted for a good 15, 20 minutes. These runners just kept trucking along. Anybody from a t-shirt with shorts to a heavy layered look was the spread of clothing. So it was an interesting, but I think again, a good fun event, a good crowd, cross-section of age, families, singles, etc. So it was again, a successful outing.
Great.
Okay, any other business to come before the meeting? Hearing none, there has been a request for a non-public session to discuss items pursuant to RSA 91A, 3A, and B.
Bill Garrity, yes?
Peter Christie, yes?
Nancy Carter, yes?
Joanna Woodman, yes.
We are in non-public session. Thank you.
Thanks for coming, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.